Okay, so the Women's Euros has concluded. Obviously, last night England beat Spain on penalties in the final in Basel, in front of a what was a packed house at St Jacobs Park. Overall, the tournament's been brilliant. Takeouts from the tournament, I think goals per game is actually up. I'll have to look at goals per game average and look at several previous tournaments as well and compare to see if goals per game has gone up. But there was not a single goalless game. There were goals in every single game. No goalless draws, including in the group stages, which I found interesting. Now, yes, there were draws, but there were no goalless draws. There were goals in every single game, including in those knockout games that went to extra time where no goals were scored in the 90 minutes. There was still a ball in the back of the net before a penalty shootout, which is important. The attendance records have been smashed. The viewership records have been smashed. Now, on the attendance records, I find that very interesting. Considering in Switzerland, most of the average size of the stadiums is smaller than here in England, where the attendance records got smashed 3 years ago. I'm surprised even more people attended, so there's less empty seats. So when they're saying, people aren't interested in women's football, or they're shoving it down our throats, and I see that a lot, well, clearly people were saving up to go. Tickets weren't cheap. Let's just put that out there. Switzerland is a very expensive country to visit. So that includes transportation. Well, transportation in Switzerland's not too bad, but hotels, food, drink, stadium, tickets, that's expensive. So people have spent money to go to this tournament. It is not a cheap place to visit, is Switzerland. So for them to break the attendance record, I think is a really, really good sign that the women's game is growing naturally and growing in a really good direction. In regards to how teams performed, I was disappointed with all the Scandinavian nations. I think Sweden blew it in the in the first knockout stage in the quarterfinals against England, being 2-0 up, with the way they were freewheeling and scoring at the time. Considering how Sweden had demolished Germany, I'm surprised they choked that one in the quarterfinal. England, even though England have won the tournament, they weren't anywhere near as good as the World Cup and the previous Euros they won, where they again made the finals in both. I think they've stepped back a little bit. They were really sloppy, and you could argue some of the players weren't fully fit. There's some selection headaches. When your starting goalkeeper decides I'm going to retire on the eve of the tournament and decides not to fight for her place in the squad, with Mary Earps going, I quit. There were some question marks going into this tournament, and of course their opening night defeat against France in Group D. You're thinking, okay, has this England side got to go through a rebuild? But then they came to life in the rest of the group stage, and then they were in a win now mentality for the rest of the tournament. Spain, their development as a country over the last decade has been fantastic. There's a reason why they've got back-to-back finals and they're world champions, but they didn't seize control of the final. I think it's a good way to look at that. Germany, disappointing. For example, really disappointed with Germany. Italy, they battled their way to a semi-final and got within a minute of making the final. So, hard luck on Italy there. And that would have been an interesting match-up between Spain and Italy, considering they had met in the group stage and Italy had led in their group stage game as well for a period, and Spain had to come from behind to win that game. But overall, I think the quality level has improved. There are still some nations like Portugal, for example, that have still got a long way to go to catch up to the more established European nations. Poland making their debut were competitive. They did all right. But the Scandinavian nations, for me, were really surprising with how poor they were. Denmark, really surprised with how they have just fallen off a cliff in regards to where they are, to where they were not that long ago. Not that long ago, they were in the final of this tournament. So Denmark has really fallen off a cliff in regards of where they're hitting in the international game. Switzerland, I think, were decent hosts. I think it was important for the hosts to make it out the group stage, which they did, and they gave Spain some issues. But when you had a player sent off against Spain, you're probably going to struggle. They did lose 2-0, so they didn't progress further than the quarterfinals, but I think it was important for the host nation to get out the group. I think that's always important. But no, the Scandinavian nations, I think this time around, were really disappointing. I think Sweden showed the most, attacking threat and were the most entertaining, and then 2-0 up against England in the quarterfinal, commanding position, and then they lost control of that game and then lost the penalty shootout. What is also surprising as a takeout from this tournament is the amount of missed penalties. Either in normal play, where a penalty's been awarded because of a foul in the box, or in a penalty shootout, the amount of missed penalties where the penalties actually missed the target, let alone being saved. That was very, very surprising. Another surprising thing, we had no goals from direct free kicks. Found that very interesting as well. So no goals from direct free kicks, although we did see a lot of goals from distance. So that's another interesting takeout from that. Was no direct free kick goals. I don't think that's ever happened in a tournament before, but in the men's or the women's, I don't think that has ever happened. But I do think the goalkeeping standard has improved. I think the overall standard is slowly improving. I think some nations have improved rapidly. Other nations, little steps. I mean, nations like Poland and Wales, for example, making their debuts at international tournaments. You can see that that development is there. In regards of the opening game between Finland and Iceland, that should have been between Switzerland and Norway. Honestly, I think Switzerland-Norway should have been the opening game. Have the hosts open the tournament with the opening game. In regards to kick-off times, I think UEFA have got the scheduling right there. Obviously, at the start of the tournament, the first week, 2 weeks of the tournament, the temperatures across Europe were ridiculously hot. We were in the middle of a heat wave. And even with the later kickoffs, even at 8, 9 p.m, it was still over 30 degrees Celsius at altitude in Switzerland. So that tells you how hot it was. I think UEFA dealt with those weather concerns quite well. We didn't see the expected thunderstorms causing the disruption that we've seen at previous Euros, like Austria and Switzerland in the men's in 2008, where we did see some torrential downpours. Germany last year, the World Cup in Germany in 2006, where we have seen some of these hot, humid conditions, and then the thunderstorm comes, and then there's the potential for weather delays. We thankfully didn't see any of that. I think UEFA managed the heat concerns, especially early on in the tournament, really well. It has cooled down a little bit. We're getting some cooler weather to end July, but at the beginning of the tournament, yes, 3 weeks ago, the temperatures were ridiculous. We were in the middle of some brutal heat waves, and I tell you now, daytime temperatures were brutal. Evening temperatures didn't cool off. It's still quite warm at night now. I think UEFA dealt with that quite well. I think the playing surfaces held up reasonably well. That was a criticism last year of the men's Euros, was the playing surfaces looked not great. They didn't hold up very well. There was some criticism of the playing surfaces last year at the men's Euros. So I think they've taken that into consideration. They've made sure that the playing surfaces are top notch, considering how long the European club season is now and how much use these stadiums get. I think the playing surfaces held up really well. We didn't see a lot of players slipping over or the pitches cutting up too bad. Overall, I think the fan experience was pretty good. We have not seen any negative headlines about a negative fan experience, with accessibility issues to stadiums being a problem, or exiting stadiums, or transportation links being an issue. We did see some of them last year in Germany. There were concerns about the transportation network in Germany not being as efficient as German transportation should be, but that is actually an ongoing issue in Germany with the transport infrastructure, and has been for a little while. Switzerland dealt with it perfectly. I think the host stadiums they used and the host cities they used were, I think, appropriate. Some of the smaller stadiums for some of the lesser nations, for example, or the less expected crowds, I think they got the use of stadiums right. Training camps, I think all the teams have mentioned how good the training camps were and how well provided they were with facilities. In regards to where they could make improvements, I'm not sure they can make too many improvements, if we're being honest. I think opening and closing ceremonies, they always drag on too long, in my opinion. I'm not a fan of them. So it'd be interesting to see what the FIFA World Cup next year with opening and closing ceremonies. I'm never a massive fan of them, if I'm being honest. I think they go on too long, and do we really need them? But we've had them now for donkey's years, and they're going to stay. But no, I think certain areas we could see some improvement, especially in the delayed offsides, the semi-automated offsides, the delayed offside where the the touch judge puts up their flag quite late. They need to do that quicker to avoid potential injuries where, you know, two players going for a challenge, then the flag goes up for the offside. Also, change on the interpretation of the offside rule, in my opinion, in regards to using it with VAR. We need to give the benefit of the doubt back to the attacker like it was in the old days and have a clear separation between attacker and defender to go, that is a clear advantage. Because when you're having goals ruled out for offside for being a toe offside, we are talking less than the size of this wallet, the width of this wallet offside. That to me, the attacker has not got that clear advantage over a defender. The defender may actually be a quicker player than the attacker and may close that ground quite quickly, and then... So I think there needs to be a few rule tweaks. Another thing, VAR, some of the checks take a little bit too long. Still, all these years later, I still think all these years later, we need to speed up the VAR process. Look, it's been around now for, 7 years in major international tournaments. We've had VAR since the 2018 World Cup. I think they had a good basis back in 2018. They need to speed that up. They need to speed it up. And I think that's something that FIFA as the overall governing body and then the various confederations need to have some input, because that just took too long. I think it took too long with some of the VAR decisions. And then, again, that lack of communication. I think fans in the stadium, fans watching at home, the referee should be fully marked up, which I think will have an added benefit of reducing dissent towards the officials. But overall, I was quite pleased with the tournament. It was a good 3 weeks. I can see in the future UEFA expanding it. Whether that's right or wrong, I can see them copying what they've done in the men's game. I can see an expansion of the women's Euros to 24 teams. Again, is women's football in Europe at that level yet where you can expand and have those extra nations? Is the quality level there yet? I don't think so. I think the gap is closing between the lower ranked nations and the top ranked nations. We are seeing a power shift in the women's game. You look at 3 of the 4 semi-finalists. Only England and Germany had previously won the tournament, England being the holders. Spain obviously are World Cup holders, but had never been in the Euros final before. Italy, the last time they were in the final was in the 90s. And so you are seeing this sort of power shift now. The Scandinavian nations aren't making the semi-finals anymore. I was very disappointed with them. France, a lot was expected of France, and they fluffed. They fell apart. They imploded. In their quarter-final. They just fell apart. So it is interesting that the power shift and the power dynamic shifting. The fact we had 2 debutant nations in the tournament, I think, is showing some progression and growth. Will UEFA expand it? Probably. I think if they do, it would be too soon. I think we'd have to wait a while before they decide to go, we're going to expand the tournament to parallel the men's tournament. I don't think the depth and quality across the continent is just quite there yet. I just don't think it is. But in saying that, the quality level has definitely improved tournament on tournament. I think it's a much better product now than what it was in 2017 or 2013 for that matter. I think the quality level and the improvements in the women's game across the board has been there. But there we go. It's been a fun tournament. I think Switzerland were great hosts. Very few negatives. I think VAR there needs to be improvement. Opening ceremony, closing ceremony, do we really need them to go on as long? And I would have had the host nation Switzerland play their opening match first before Iceland, Finland. But I think they got the TV timings right for kickoffs. I think they managed the heat early on quite well with the scheduled water breaks. I think that was managed quite well. It was an exceptionally warm July that we've had, even though it has cooled down in the last week or so. I think the playing surfaces were tip top. I think the stadium's selections were pretty good, and the base training camps for the teams were also well selected, and no complaints have been had from any of the nations that attended. So there we go. There's my review of the 2025 UEFA Women's Euro. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts on the tournament in the comments section below, and I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon.